Hello, hello. Welcome to Storytime with Moog. I am Moog, and today we are reading none other than Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, starting with part 5, chapter 13. But first, reading updates. I bought a book. It's What Moves the Bed by T. King Fisher. I know two things about this book. And those are the only two things that I needed in order to, one, make everybody in book club read it, but also two, feel okay with buying it because I think I'm going to like it and I think I'm going to want it on my shelves. But one, it is a Edgar Allan Poe, The Fall of the House of Usher retelling or inspiration, something like that. And two, it's fungal horror, which I've never heard of, and I'm so intrigued by this. Fungal horror. Okay. And also the cover is just beautiful. Like, look at this. Like, what is going on? I don't really know, but I love it. So I am excited to read this. And it's also super, super short. It's less than 200 pages. Like, it's just a little guy. And this is also, I know, I always do this. This is the first in a series. There's another book that came out, I think, this year or last year, that goes along with this one. And the cover is each equally as interesting, so I'm excited for it. And then I started a new book, an audiobook on my millions of steps today. It is called Pretty Girls by Karen Slaughter. I picked it up because it was available. Because it was available. I don't know anything about it. I've listened to maybe an hour and a half worth of content, and it was good so far. It seems to be alternating between this like father who is either writing an open letter to his daughter or something, but his daughter has gone missing, and so that's part of it. But and then the other part, I don't really know what's going on. I'm intrigued, but I don't know how anything is connected. Also, it would help if I remembered people's names because then I could be like, "Oh, that's the mom" or whatever, but I don't. So, I started it. I don't have enough information to tell you anything about it. Okay, those are the only things that I'm reading, but I'm really excited for both of them. Also, Karen Slaughter is the author, and what a great last name for writing like a thriller book. That's perfect. Could not have picked a better one. Let's just do it. Okay, so the plan today, we are reading Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. Leo Tolstoy, starting with part 5, chapter 13. There's 33 chapters in this part. The goal is to finish the part today. So reading 20 chapters today. Okay, so last time, what happened? We had a lot of chapters of marriage. So Levin and Kitty are now officially married. It has happened. The wedding has been completed. They have now flung themselves off to the country immediately following their marriage or their wedding. And then, so we spent a lot of time with them, and now we are with Anna and Vronsky. Anna and Vronsky have been touring through Europe. It's been 3 months, and Anna is they're both experiencing the reality of what they have done and the reality of their relationship now that it's actually happening and now they actually have each other's attention. And so Anna is getting very jealous and also just trying to hoard all of Vronsky's time. And because she like needs to be needed and she needs to be loved and all of these other things. And Vronsky is starting to notice that and also being like, okay, so the forbidden fruit that I wanted so bad is no longer forbidden. Is it everything that I hoped and dreamed? I don't know. So, exciting stuff. Exciting stuff. Oh, and they went to, so now Vronsky's a painter because apparently he used to love painting and now he has the time to do it. So he's a painter, and they went to go see an artist named Mikhailov and fell in love with one of the paintings. We had some chapters with Mikhailov, and what else has happened? There's another character that we met. I don't remember his name, but he knew Vronsky like a long time ago. And they just like bumped into each other in Italy. Okay, I think that's it. Let's get to it. Okay, part 5, chapter 13. Get cozy. Mikhailov sold Vronsky his picture and agreed to paint a portrait of Anna. On the day fixed, he came and began the work. From the 5th sitting, the portrait impressed everyone, especially Vronsky, not only by its resemblance, but by its characteristic beauty. It was strange how Mikhailov could have discovered just her characteristic beauty. One needs to know and love her as I have loved her to discover the very sweetest expression of her soul, Vronsky thought, though it was only from this portrait that he had himself learned this sweetest expression of her soul. The expression was so true that he, and others too, fancied they had long known it. I've been struggling on forever so long without doing anything, he said of his own portrait of her, and he just looked and painted it. That's where technique comes in. That will come, was the consoling reassurance given him by Goleneshev, in whose view Vronsky had both talent and, what was most important, culture, giving him a wider outlook on art. Goleneshev's faith in Vronsky's talent was propped up by his own need of Vronsky's sympathy and approval for his own articles and ideas, and he felt that the praise and support must be mutual. In another man's house, and especially in Vronsky's palazzo, Mikhailov was quite a different man from what he was in his studio. He behaved with hostile courtesy, as though he were afraid of coming closer to people he did not respect. He called Vronsky "Your Excellency," and not without standing Anna's and Vronsky's invitations, he would never stay to dinner, nor come except for the sittings. Anna was even more friendly to him than to other people, and was very grateful for her portrait. Vronsky was more than cordial with him, and was obviously interested to know the artist's opinion of his picture. Goleneshev never let slip an opportunity of instilling sound ideas about art into Mikhailov, but Mikhailov remained equally chilly to all of them. Anna was aware from his eyes that he liked looking at her, but he avoided conversation with her. Vronsky's talk about his painting he met with stubborn silence, and he was as stubbornly silent when he was shown Vronsky's picture. He was unmistakably bored by Goleneshev's conversation, and he did not attempt to oppose him. Altogether, Mikhailov, with his reserved and disagreeable, as it were, hostile attitude, was quite disliked by them as they got to know him better, and they were glad when the sittings were over, and they were left with a magnificent portrait in their possession, and he gave up coming, Golenishev was the first to give expression to an idea that had occurred to all of them, which was that Mikhailov was simply jealous of Vronsky. Not envious, let us say, since he has talent, but it annoys him that a wealthy man of the highest society, and account, too, you know they all detest a title, can, without any particular trouble, do as well, if not better, than he who has devoted all his life to it. And more than all, it's a question of culture, which he is without. Vronsky defended Mikhailov, but at the bottom of his heart he believed it, because in his view a man of a different, lower world would be sure to be envious. Anna's portrait, the same subject painted from nature both by him and by Mikhailov, ought to have shown Vronsky the difference between him and Mikhailov. But he did not see it. Only after Mikhailov's portrait was painted, he left off painting his portrait of Anna, deciding that it was now not needed. His picture of medieval life he went on with. And he himself and Golenishev, and still more Anna, thought it was very good, because it was far more like the celebrated pictures they knew than Mikhailov's picture. Mikhailov, meanwhile, although Anna's portrait greatly fascinated him, was even more glad than they were when the sittings were over, and he had no longer to listen to Golenishev's disquisitions upon art, and could forget that Vronsky's picture. He knew that Vronsky could not be prevented from amusing himself with painting. He knew that he and all dilettanti had a perfect right to paint what they liked, but it was distasteful to him. A man could not be prevented from making himself a big wax doll and kissing it. But if the man were to come with the doll and sit before a man in love and begin caressing his doll as the lover caressed the woman he loved, it would be distasteful to the lover. Just such a distasteful sensation was that Mikhailov felt at the sight of Vronsky's painting. He felt it both ludicrous and irritating, both pitiable and offensive. Vronsky's interest in painting and the Middle Ages did not last long. He had enough taste for painting to be unable to finish his picture. The picture came to a standstill. He was vaguely aware that its defects, inconspicuous at first, would be glaring if he were to go on with it. The same experience befell him as Golenishev, who felt that he had nothing to say, and continually deceived himself with the theory that his idea was not yet mature, that he was working it out and collecting materials. This exasperated and tortured Golenishev, but Vronsky was incapable of deceiving and torturing himself, and even more incapable of exasperation. With his characteristic decision, without explanation or apology, he simply ceased working at painting. But without this occupation, the life of Vronsky and of Anna, who wondered at his loss of interest in it, struck them as intolerably tedious in an Italian town. The palazzo suddenly seemed so obtrusively old and dirty. The spots on the curtains, the cracks in the floors, the broken plaster on the cornices became so disagreeably obvious, and the everlasting sameness of Golenishev and the Italian professor and the German traveler became so wearisome that they had to make some change. They resolved to go to Russia, to the country. In Petersburg, Vronsky intended to arrange a partition of the land with his brother, while Anna meant to see her son. The summer they intended to spend on Vronsky's great family estate. End of chapter 13. Okay, chapter 13. I totally forgot that Vronsky was painting a portrait of Anna, and when he found out about this other painter, Mikhailov, he was like, oh, Mikhailov can paint Anna's portrait. And Anna's like, why would I ever want that? you're already painting my picture. So interesting that now that that Mikhailov has been painting it, Vronsky is like, yeah, I don't really need to do this anymore. And Anna is wondering why Vronsky has stopped doing this. It's just a lot going on. It's just a lot of like internal things that are going on in this past chapter, and not so much like plot or like over the top drama. It's just more like simmering uneasiness. But at the end of the chapter, we do have the conclusion that they are going to return. Anna is going to be able to see her son, and they are going to stay at Vronsky's family estate. So they're coming back home, no longer traveling in Italy or anything like that. All right, chapter 14. Levin had been married 3 months. He was happy, but not at all in the way he had expected to be. At every step, he found his former dreams disappointed and new, unexpected surprises of happiness. He was happy, but on entering upon family life, he saw at every step that it was utterly different from what he had imagined. At every step, he experienced what a man would experience who, after admiring the smooth, happy course of a little boat on a lake, should get himself into that little boat. He saw that it was not all sitting still, floating smoothly, that one had to think too, not for an instant, to forget where one was floating, and that there was water under one, and that one must row, and that his unaccustomed hands would be sore, and that it was only to look at that was easy, but that doing it, though very delightful, was very difficult. As a bachelor, when he had watched other people's married life, seen the petty cares, the squabbles, the jealousy, he had only smiled contemptuously in his heart. In his future married life, there could be, he was convinced, nothing of that sort. Even the external forms, indeed, he fancied, must be utterly unlike the life of others in everything. And all of a sudden, instead of his life with his wife being made on an individual pattern, it was, on the contrary, entirely made up of the pettiest details which he had so despised before, but which now, by no will of his own, had gained in extraordinary importance that it was useless to contend against. And Levin saw that the organization of all these details was by no means so easy as he had fancied before, although Levin believed himself to have the most exact conceptions of domestic life. Unconsciously, like all men, he pictured domestic life as the happiest enjoyment of love, with nothing to hinder and no petty cares to distract. He ought, as he conceived the position, to do his work and to find repose from it in the happiness of love. She ought to be beloved, and nothing more. But, like all men, he forgot that she too would want work. And he was surprised that she, his poetic, exquisite Kitty, could, not merely in the first weeks, but even in the first days of their married life, think, remember, and busy herself about tablecloths and furniture, about mattresses for visitors, about a tray, about the cook and the dinner, and so on. While they were still engaged, he had been struck by the definiteness with which she had declined the tour abroad and had decided to go into the country, as though she knew of something she wanted and could still think of something outside her love. This had jarred upon him then, and now her trivial cares and anxieties jarred upon him several times. But he saw that this was essential for her, and, loving her as he did, though he did not understand the reason of them and jeered at these domestic pursuits, he could not help admiring them. He jeered at the way in which she arranged the furniture they had brought from Moscow, rearranged their room, hung up curtains, prepared rooms for visitors, a room for Dolly, saw after an abode for her new maid, ordered dinner of the old cook, came into collision with Agafea Mikhailovna, taking from her the charge of the stores. He saw how the old cook smiled, admiring her and listening to her inexperienced, impossible orders. How mournfully and tenderly Agafea Mikhailovna shook her head over the young mistress's new arrangements. He saw that Kitty was extraordinarily sweet when, laughing and crying, she came to tell him that her maid, Masha, was used to looking upon her as a young lady, and so no one obeyed her. It seemed to him sweet, but strange, and he thought it would have been better without this. He did not know how great a sense of change she was experiencing. She, who at home had sometimes wanted some favorite dish or sweets without the possibility of getting either, now could order what she liked, buy pounds of sweets, spend as much money as she liked, and order any puddings she pleased. She was dreaming with delight now of Dolly's coming to them with her children, especially because she would order for the children their favorite puddings, and Dolly would appreciate all her new housekeeping. She did not know herself why and wherefore, but the arranging of her house had an irresistible attraction for her. Instinctively feeling the approach of spring and knowing that there would be days of rough weather too, she built her nest as best she could, and was in haste at the same time to build it and to learn how to do it. This care for domestic details in Kitty, as opposed to Levin's ideals of exalted happiness, was at first one of the disappointments, and this sweet care of her household, the aim of which he did not understand, but could not help loving, was one of the new happy surprises. Another disappointment and happy surprise came in their quarrels. Levin could never have conceived that between him and his wife any relations could arise other than tender, respectful, and loving, and all at once in the very early days they quarreled, so that she said he did not care for her, that he cared for no one but himself, burst into tears, and wrung her arms. This first quarrel arose from Levin's having gone out to a new farmhouse and having been away half an hour too long because he had tried to get home by a shortcut and had lost his way. He drove home thinking of nothing but her, of her love, of her own happiness, and the nearer he drew to home, the warmer was his tenderness for her. He ran into the room with the same feeling, with an even stronger feeling that he had had when he reached the Shtcherbatskoys' house to make his offer. And suddenly he was met by a lowering expression he had never seen in her. He would have kissed her. She pushed him away. "What is it?" "You've been enjoying yourself," she began, trying to be calm and spiteful. But as soon as she opened her mouth, a stream of reproach, of senseless jealousy, of all that had been torturing her during that half hour which she had spent sitting motionless at the window, burst from her. It was only then, for the first time, that he clearly understood what he had not understood when he led her out of the church after the wedding. He felt now that he was not simply close to her, but that he did not know where he ended and she began. He felt this from the agonizing sensation of division that he experienced at that instant. He was offended for the first instant, but the very same second he felt that he could not be offended by her, that she was himself. He felt for the first moment as a man feels when, having suddenly received a violent blow from behind, he turns around, angry and eager to avenge himself, to look for his antagonist, and finds that it is he himself who has accidentally struck himself, that there is no one to be angry with, and that he must put up with and try to soothe the pain. Never afterwards did he feel it with such intensity, but this first time he could not for a long while get over it. His natural feeling urged him to defend himself, to prove to her she was wrong, but to prove her wrong would mean irritating her still more and making the rupture greater that was the cause of all his suffering. One habitual feeling impelled him to get rid of the blame and to pass it to her. Another feeling, even stronger, impelled him as quickly as possible to smooth over the rupture without letting it grow greater. To remain under such undeserved reproach was wretched, but to make her suffer by justifying himself was still worse. Like a man half awake in an agony of pain, he wanted to tear out, to fling away the aching place and come to his senses. He felt that the aching place was himself. He could do nothing but try to help the aching place to bear it, and this he tried to do. They made peace. She, recognizing that she was wrong, though she did not say so, became tenderer to him, and they experienced new, redoubled happiness in their love. But that did not prevent such quarrels from happening again, and exceedingly often, too, on the most unexpected and trivial grounds. These quarrels frequently arose from the fact that they did not yet know what was of importance to each other, and that all this early period they were both often in a bad temper. When one was in a good temper and the other in a bad temper, the peace was not broken. But when both happened to be in ill temper, quarrels sprang up from such incomprehensibly trifling causes that they could never remember afterwards what they had quarreled about. It is true that when they were both in a good temper, their enjoyment of life was redoubled. But still, this first period of their married life was a difficult time for them. During all this early time, they had a peculiarly vivid sense of tension, as it were, a tugging in opposite directions of the chain by which they were bound. Altogether, their honeymoon, that is to say, the month after their wedding, from which, from tradition, Levin expected so much, was not merely not a time of sweetness, but remained in the memories of both as the bitterest and most humiliating period in their lives. They both alike tried in later life to blot out from their memories all the monstrous, shameful incidents of that morbid period, when both were rarely in a normal frame of mind. Both were rarely quite themselves. It was only in the third month of their married life, after their return from Moscow, where they had been staying for a month, that their life began to go more smoothly. End of chapter 14. Okay, chapter 14, we mosey on back to Levin and Kitty, and they have now been married for 3 months, and they didn't go abroad. They, in fact, went to the country. And now that they're married, they're realizing they're actually like learning about each other and stepping on each other's toes. And it seems like they're getting in arguments a lot and jealousy a lot from a lot of just seemingly trivial things. And it seems like they are just getting things ready. And Levin is realizing he didn't really think through all of the details. He only had the like high level goals of what he wanted. And those high level goals of getting married, check. Wife is Kitty, check. But now all of the details of what that actually means is unfolding. So It's almost like you shouldn't immediately marry somebody and maybe, like, I don't know, date for a while, but get to know the person for a while. But what do I know? Chapter 15. They had just come back from Moscow and were glad to be alone. He was sitting at the writing table in his study, writing. She, wearing the dark lilac dress she had worn during the first days of their married life, and put on again today, a dress particularly remembered and loved by him, was sitting on the sofa, the same old-fashioned leather sofa which had always stood in the study in Levin's father's and grandfather's day. She was sewing at broderie anglaise, he thought and wrote, never losing the happy consciousness of her presence. His work, both on the land and on the book, in which the principles of the new land system were to be laid down, had not been abandoned. But just as formerly these pursuits and ideas had seemed to him petty and trivial in comparison with the darkness that overspread all life, now they seemed as unimportant and petty in comparison with the life that lay before him, suffused with the brilliant light of happiness. He went on with his work, but he felt now that the center of gravity of his attention had passed to something else, and that consequently he looked at his work quite differently and more clearly. Formerly, this work had been for him an escape from life. Formerly, he had felt that without this work, his life would be too gloomy. Now these pursuits were necessary for him that life might not be too uniformly bright. Taking up his manuscript, reading through what he had written, he found with pleasure that the work was worth his working at. Many of his old ideas seemed to him superfluous and extreme, but many blanks became distinct to him when he reviewed the whole thing in his memory. He was writing now a new chapter on the causes of the present disastrous condition of agriculture in Russia. He maintained that the poverty of Russia arises not merely from the anomalous distribution of landed property and misdirected reforms, but that what had contributed of late years to this result was the civilization from without abnormally grafted upon Russia, especially facilities of communication, as railways, leading to centralization in towns, the development of luxury, and the consequent development of manufactures, credit, and its accompaniment of speculation, all to the detriment of agriculture. It seemed to him that in a normal development of wealth in a state, all these phenomena would arise only when a considerable amount of labor had been put into agriculture, when it had come under regular, or at least definite, conditions, that the wealth of a country ought to increase proportionately, and especially in such a way that other sources of wealth should not outstrip agriculture, that in harmony with a certain stage of agriculture, there should be means of communication corresponding to it, and that in our unsettled condition of the land, railways, called into being by political and not by economical needs, were premature, and instead of promoting agriculture as was expected of them, they were competing with agriculture and promoting the development of manufactures and credit, and so arresting its progress. And that just as the one-sided and premature development of one organ in an animal would hinder its general development, so in the general development of wealth in Russia, credit, facilities of communication, manufacturing activity, indubitably necessary in Europe, where they had arisen in their proper time, had with us only done harm by throwing into the background the chief question calling for settlement, the question of the organization of agriculture. While he was writing his ideas, she was thinking how unnaturally cordial her husband had been to young Prince Charsky, who had, with great want of tact, flirted with her the day before they left Moscow. He's jealous, she thought. Goodness, how sweet and silly he is. How jealous of me. If he knew that I think no more of them than of Pyotr the cook, she thought, looking at his head and red neck with a feeling of possession strange to herself. Though it's a pity to take him from his work, but he has plenty of time. I must look at his face. Will he feel I'm looking at him? I wish he'd turn round. I'll will him to. And she opened her eyes wide, as though to intensify the influence of her gaze. Yes, they draw away all the sap and give a false appearance of prosperity, he muttered, stopping to write, and feeling that she was looking at him and smiling, he looked around. Well, he queried, smiling and getting up. He looked round, she thought. Oh, it's nothing. I wanted you to look around, she said, watching him and trying to guess whether he was vexed at being interrupted or not. How happy we are alone together. I am, that is, he said, going up to her with a radiant smile of happiness. I'm just so happy. I'll never go anywhere, especially not to Moscow. And what were you thinking about? I was thinking... No, go along. Go on writing. Don't break off, she said, pursing up her lips. And I must cut out these little holes now. Do you see? She took up her scissors and began cutting them out. No, tell me, what is it? He said, sitting down beside her and watching the tiny scissors moving around. Oh, what was I thinking about? I was thinking about Moscow, about the back of your head. Why should I, of all people, have such happiness? It's unnatural, too good, he said, kissing her hand. I feel quite the opposite. The better things are, the more natural it seems to me. And you've got a little curl loose, he said, carefully turning her head round. A little curl? Oh, yes. No, we are busy at our work. Work did not progress further, and they departed apart from one another like culprits when Kuzma came in to announce the tea was ready. Have they come from the town? Levin asked Kuzma. They've just come. They're unpacking the things. Come quickly, she said to him as she went out of the study, or else I shall read your letters without you. Left alone, after putting his manuscripts together in the new portfolio bought by her, he washed his hands at the new washstand with the elegant fittings that had all made their appearance with her. Levin smiled at his own thoughts and shook his head disapprovingly at those thoughts. A feeling akin to remorse fretted him. There was something shameful, effeminate, Capuan, as he called it to himself in his present mode of life. It's not right to go on like this, he thought. It'll be 3 months, and I'm doing next to nothing. Today, almost for the first time, I set to work seriously, and what happened? I did nothing but begin and throw it aside. Even my ordinary pursuits I have almost given up. On the land I scarcely walk or drive about at all to look after things. Either I am loath to leave her, or I see she's dull alone. And I used to think that, before marriage, life was nothing much. Somehow didn't count, but that after marriage, life began in earnest. And here almost 3 months have passed, and I have spent my time so idly and unprofitable. No, this won't do. I must begin. Of course, it's not her fault. She's not to blame in any way. I ought myself to be firmer, to maintain my masculine independence of action, or else I shall get into such ways, and she'll get used to them too. Of course, she's not to blame, he told himself. But it is hard for anyone who is dissatisfied not to blame someone else, and especially the person nearest of all to him, for the ground of his dissatisfaction. And it vaguely came into Levin's mind that she herself was not to blame. She could not be to blame for anything. But what was to blame was her education, too superfluous and frivolous. That fool, Charsky. She wanted, I know, to stop him, but didn't know how to. Yes, apart from her interest in the house, that she has, apart from dress and broderie anglaise, she has no serious interests. No interest in her work, in the estate, in the peasants, nor in music, though she's rather good at it, nor in reading. She does nothing, and is perfectly satisfied. Levin, in his heart, censured this, and did not as yet understand that she was preparing for that period of activity which was to come for her, when she would at once be the wife of her husband and mistress of the house, and would bear and nurse and bring up children. He knew not that she was instinctively aware of this, and preparing herself for this time of terrible toil, did not reproach herself for the moments of carelessness and happiness in her love that she enjoyed now while gaily building her nest for the future. End of chapter 15. Okay, chapter 15 is interesting. Okay, so Levin is like catching himself and like realizing that he hasn't really been doing a lot of work since being married, and he's like, I need to just realign my priorities. It's great being married, but my work. And so he gets back to work, and lest we forget that he has the idea of revolutionizing how agriculture and how working the land is done, not just on his land, but everywhere. So he is also writing a book with his ideas. He has traveled around previously to see how other countries and other landowners are working their land and getting the most profitable crops. And so now he's just gathering all of his information and putting it down into words. And so he's trying to get more serious about that. And while he's doing that, he's realizing that Kitty just doesn't have any interests, and she doesn't have any education, which is interesting that he points this out, because he has previously stated that women and like peasant people do not need education. They don't need to go to school. So it's interesting that he has that opposite reaction, or that opposite thought, when he is face to face with Kitty, who doesn't have an interest in reading and doesn't have an interest in economics, and like has these very homemakery, nest making, about to be or preparing to be the head of the household, or the mistress of the household, and a mother to the children. Interesting. Chapter 16. When Levin went upstairs, his wife was sitting near the new silver samovar behind the new tea service, and, having settled old Agafea Mikhailovna at a little table with a full cup of tea, was reading a letter from Dolly, with whom they were in continual and frequent correspondence. You see, your good ladies settled me here, told me to sit a bit with her, said Agafea Mikhailovna, smiling affectionately at Kitty. In these words of Agafea Mikhailovna, Levin read the final act of the drama which had been enacted of late between her and Kitty. He saw that, in spite of Agafea Mikhailovna's feelings being hurt by a new mistress taking the reins of government out of her hands, Kitty had yet conquered her and made her love her. Here, I opened your letter too, said Kitty, handing him an illiterate letter. It's from that woman, I think. Your brother's, she said. I did not read it, though. This is from my people and from Dolly. Fancy, Dolly took Tanya and Grisha to a children's ball at the Sarmatskys. Tanya was a French marquise. But Levin did not hear her. Flushing, He took the letter from Marya Nikolaevna, his brother's former mistress, and began to read it. This was the second letter he had received from Marya Nikolaevna. In the first letter, Marya Nikolaevna wrote that his brother had sent her away for no fault of hers, and, with touching simplicity, added that though she was in want again, she asked for nothing, and wished for nothing, but was only tormented by the thought that Nikolai Dmitrievich would come to grief without her, owing to the weak state of his health, and begged his brother to look after him. Now she wrote quite differently. She had found Nikolai Dmitrievich and had again made it up with him in Moscow, and had moved with him to a provincial town where he had received a post in the government service. But that he had quarreled with the head official and was on his way back to Moscow, only he had been taken ill on the road that it was doubtful he would ever leave his bed again, she wrote. It's always of you he has talked, and, besides, he has no more money left. Read this. Dolly writes about you, Kitty was beginning, with a smile, but she stopped, suddenly, noticing the changed expression on her husband's face. What is it? What's the matter? She writes to me of Nikolai, my brother, is at death's door. I shall go to him. Kitty's face changed at once. The thoughts of Tanya as a marquise, of Dolly, all had vanished. When are you going? She said. Tomorrow. And I will go with you, can I? She said. Kitty, what are you thinking of? He said, reproachfully. How do you mean? Offended that he should seem to take her suggestion unwilling and with vexation. Why shouldn't I go? I shan't be in your way. I'm going because my brother is dying, said Levin. Why should you? Why? For the same reason as you, and at a moment of such gravity for me, she only thinks of her being dull by herself, thought Levin. And this lack of candor in a matter of such gravity infuriated him. It's out of the question, he said sternly. Agafea Mikhailovna, seeing that it was coming to a quarrel, gently put down her cup and withdrew. Kitty did not even notice her. The tone in which her husband had said the last words wounded her, especially because he evidently did not believe what she had said. I tell you that if you go, I shall come with you. I shall certainly come, she said hastily and wrathfully. Why out of the question? Why do you say it's out of the question? Because it'll be going God knows where, by all sorts of roads and to all sorts of hotels. You would be a hindrance to me, said Levin, trying to be cool. Not at all. I don't want anything. Where you can go, I can... Well, for one thing, then, because this woman's there whom you can't meet. I don't know and don't care to know who's there and what. I know that my husband's brother is dying, and my husband is going to him, and I go with my husband too. Kitty, don't get angry, but just think a little. This is a matter of such importance that I can't bear to think that you should bring in a feeling of weakness, of dislike to being left alone. Come, you'll be dull alone, so go and stay at Moscow a little. There. You always ascribe base, vile motives to me, she said with tears of wounded pride and fury. I didn't mean... It wasn't weakness, it wasn't... I feel that it's my duty to be with my husband when he's in trouble, but you try on purpose to hurt me. You try on purpose not to understand. No, this is awful. To be such a slave, cried Levin, getting up and unable to restrain his anger any longer. But at the same time he felt that he was beating himself. Then why did you marry me? You could have been free. Why did you, if you regret it? She said, getting up and running away into the drawing room. When he saw her, she was sobbing. He began to speak, trying to find words not to dissuade, but simply to soothe her. But she did not heed him and would not agree to anything. He bent down to her and took her hand, which resisted him. He kissed her hand, kissed her hair, kissed her hand again. Still, she was silent. But when he took her face in both his hands and said, "Kitty," she suddenly recovered herself and began to cry, and they were reconciled. It was decided that they should go together the next day. Levin told his wife that he believed she wanted to go simply in order to be of use, agreed that Maria Nikolaevna's being with his brother did not make her going improper. But he set off at the bottom of his heart, dissatisfied both with her and with himself. He was dissatisfied with her for being unable to make up her mind to let him go when it was necessary, and how strange it was for him to think that he, so lately hardly daring to believe in such happiness as that she could love him, now was unhappy because she loved him too much. And he was dissatisfied with himself, not for showing more strength of will. Even greater was the feeling of disagreement at the bottom of his heart, as to her not needing to consider the woman who was with her brother, and he thought with horror of all the contingencies they might meet with. The mere idea of his wife, his Kitty, being in the same room with common wench, set him shuddering with horror and loathing. End of chapter 16. Okay. So, Kitty and Levin have a big fight because they each got a letter. Kitty's is more excited because she got it from Dolly, and she's learning all of these cute little things that they're all doing. And Levin's letter is from his brother's mistress, which the last time we saw Levin's brother, he was extremely sickly, and we thought that it would be the last time that they would see each other. And so he gets the letter from Maria Nikolaevna, and it is the second letter that he has received. And this one, she has never asked for anything, even though she does not have any money, and her brother, or his brother, is not going to be able to leave any money for her. But Levin decides that he has to go. His brother is dying and he needs to see his brother. And Kitty is like, okay, well, I'm going to go with you. And Levin is like, absolutely not. You will be in my way. And Kitty is like, how dare? I will not be in your way. I am your wife. My husband's brother is dying. My husband is going to go see said brother, so I am going with my husband. And so they're going back and forth. And Levin is just... Everybody handles grief differently. Everybody processes information differently. But the reasons that he gave, or thinks that Kitty wants to go, or thinks that Kitty will be in the way, are just so wild. I don't know. It was a rough chapter for their relationship, which we knew their relationship would be rocky from the very start. So this is not a surprise, or should not be a surprise, that they are arguing over just very basic things. Like, of course she's going to want to go if her husband's brother dies. Of course. That just makes sense. And Levin is fighting it. Maybe he just wants the time to be by himself. Maybe he really does think that Kitty is going to be in the way and he just doesn't want to deal with her. Who knows the actual reason? Not us. And so it ended with the decision that they are both going to go together tomorrow. Chapter 17. The hotel of the provincial town where Nikolai Levin was lying ill was one of those provincial hotels which are constructed on the newest model of modern improvements. With the best intentions of cleanliness, comfort, and even elegance, but owing to the public that patronizes them, are with astounding rapidity transformed into filthy taverns with a pretension of modern improvement that only makes them worse than the old-fashioned, honestly filthy hotels. This hotel had already reached that stage, and the soldier in a filthy uniform smoking in the entry, supposed to stand for a hall porter, and the cast iron, slippery, dark, and disagreeable staircase, and the free and easy waiter in a filthy frock coat, and the common dining room with a dusty bouquet of wax flowers adorning the table, the filth, dust, and disorder everywhere, and at the same time the sort of modern, up-to-date, self-complacent railway uneasiness of this hotel aroused a most painful feeling in Levin after their fresh, young life, especially because the impression of falsity made by the hotel was so out of keeping with what awaited them. As is invariably the case, after they had been asked at what price they wanted rooms, it appeared that there was not one decent room for them. One decent room had been taken by the inspector of railroads, another by a lawyer of Moscow, a third by Princess Astavieva from the country. There remained only one filthy room, next to which they promised that another should be empty by the evening. Feeling angry with his wife because what he had expected had come to pass, which was that at the moment of arrival, when his heart throbbed with emotion and anxiety to know how his brother was getting on, he should have to be seeing after her, instead of rushing straight to his brother. Levin conducted her to the room assigned them. "Go, do go," she said, looking at him with timid and guilty eyes. He went out of the door without a word, and at once stumbled over Marya Nikolaevna, who had heard of his arrival and had not dared to go to see him. She was just the same as when he saw her in Moscow, the same woolen gown and bare arms and neck, and the same good-naturedly stupid, pockmarked face, only a little plumper. "Well, how is he? How is he?" "Very bad. He can't get up. He has kept expecting you. Are you with your wife?" Levin did not, for the first moment, understand what it was confused her, but she immediately enlightened him. "I'll go away. I'll go down to the kitchen," she brought out. "Nikolai Dmitrievitch will be delighted. He heard about it, and knows your lady, and remembers her abroad." Levin realized that she meant his wife, and did not know what answer to make. Come along to him," he said. But as soon as he moved, the door of his room opened and Kitty peeped out. Levin crimsoned both from shame and from anger with his wife, who had put herself and him in such a difficult position. But Marya Nikolaevna crimsoned still more. She positively shrank together and flushed to the point of tears, and clutching the ends of her apron in both hands, twisted them in her red fingers without knowing what to say and what to do. For the first instant, Levin saw an expression of eager curiosity in the eyes with which Kitty looked at this awful woman, so incomprehensible to her. But it lasted only a single instant. "Well, how is he?" She turned to her husband, and then to her. "But one can't go on talking in the passage like this," Levin said, looking angrily at a gentleman who walked jauntily at that instant across the corridor, as though about his affairs. "Well, then come in," said Kitty, turning to Marya Nikolaevna, who had recovered herself, but noticing her husband's face of dismay. "Or go on, go, and then come for me," she said, and went back into the room. Levin went to his brother's room. He had not in the least expected what he saw and felt in his brother's room. He had expected to find him in the same state of self-deception which he had heard was so frequent with the consumption, and which had struck him so much during his brother's visit in the autumn. He had expected to find the physical signs of the approach of death more marked, greater weakness, greater emaciation, but still almost the same condition of things. He had expected himself to feel the same distress at the loss of the brother he had loved, and the same horror in face of death as he had felt then, only in a greater degree. And he had prepared himself for this, but he found something utterly different. In a little dirty room, with the painted panels of its walls filthy with spittle, and conversation audible through the thin partition from the next room, in a stifling atmosphere saturated with impurities, on a bedstead moved away from the wall, there lay covered with a quilt, a body. One arm of this body was above the quilt, and the wrist, huge as a rake handle, was attached, inconceivably, it seemed, to the thin, long bone of the arm, smooth from the beginning to the middle. The head lay sideways on the pillow. Levin could see the scanty locks wet with sweat on the temples and tense, transparent-looking forehead. It cannot be that fearful body was my brother Nikolai, thought Levin. But he went closer, saw the face, and doubt became impossible. In spite of the terrible change in the face, Levin had only to glance at those eager eyes raised at his approach, only to catch the faint movement of the mouth under the sticky mustache, to realize the terrible truth that this death-like body was his living brother. The glittering eyes looked sternly and reproachfully at his brother as he drew near, and immediately this glance established a living relationship between living men. Levin immediately felt the reproach in the eyes fixed on him, and felt remorse at his own happiness. When Constantine took him by the hand, Nikolai smiled. The smile was faint, scarcely perceptible, and in spite of the smile, the stern expression of the eyes was unchanged. "You did not expect to find me like this," he articulated with effort. "Yes. No," said Levin, hesitating over his words. "How was it you didn't let me know before? That is, at the time of my wedding. I made inquiries in all directions." He had to talk so as not to be silent, and he did not know what to say, especially as his brother made no reply, and simply stared without dropping his eyes, and evidently penetrated to the inner meaning of each word. Levin told his brother that his wife had come with him. Nikolai expressed pleasure, but said he was afraid of frightening her by his condition. A silence followed. Suddenly Nikolai stirred and began to say something. Levin expected something of peculiar gravity and importance from the expression of his face, but Nikolai began speaking of his health. He found fault with the doctor, regretting he had not a celebrated Moscow doctor. Levin saw that he still hoped. Seizing the first moment of silence, Levin got up, anxious to escape, if only for an instant, from his agonizing emotion, and said that he would go and fetch his wife. "Very well. And I will tell her to tidy up here. It's dirty and stinking here, I expect. Marya, clean up the room," the sick man said with effort. "Oh, and when you've cleared it up, go away yourself," he added, looking inquiringly at his brother. Levin made no answer. Going out into the corridor, he stopped short. He had said he would fetch his wife, but now, taking stock of the emotion he was feeling, he decided that he would try on the contrary to persuade her not to go in to the sick man. "Why should she suffer what I am suffering?" he thought. "Well, how is he?" Kitty asked with a frightened face. "Oh, it's awful. Awful. What did you come for?" said Levin. Kitty was silent for a few seconds, looking timidly and ruefully at her husband. Then she went up and took him by the elbow with both hands. "Kostya, take me to him. It will be easier for us to bear it together. You only take me to him, please, and go away," she said. "You must understand that for me to see you and not to see him is far more painful. There I might be a help to you and to him. Please, let me," she besought her husband, as though the happiness of her life depended on it. Levin was obliged to agree, and regaining his composure and completely forgetting about Marya Nikolaevna, by now, he went again in to his brother with Kitty. Stepping lightly and continually glancing at her husband, showing him a valorous and sympathetic face, Kitty went into the sick room and, turning without haste, noiselessly closed the door. With inaudible steps, she went quickly to the sick man's bedside, and going up so that he had not to turn his head, she simply clasped in her fresh, young hand the skeleton of his huge hand, pressed it, and began speaking with that soft eagerness, sympathetic and not jarring, which is peculiar to women. "We have met, though you are not acquainted, at Sodden," she said. "You never thought I was to be your sister?" "You would not have recognized me?" he said with a radiant smile at her entrance. "Yes, I should. What a good thing you let us know. Not a day has passed that Kostya has not mentioned you, and been anxious." But the sick man's interest did not last long. Before she had finished speaking, there had come back into his face the stern, reproachful expression of the dying man's envy of the living. "I am afraid you are not quite comfortable here," she said, turning away from the fixed stare and looking about the room. "We must ask about another room," she said to her husband, "so that we might be nearer." End of chapter 17. Okay, chapter 17. Levin and Kitty are now at the hotel where Dmitrievich is staying. Konstantin Dmitrievich, there we go. Konstantin Dmitrievich, Levin's brother, is staying. And, well, Levin is still not excited that Kitty is there. And so he kind of like just drops her off at their room and runs into Maria Nikolaevna and Maria in the hallway, and they're talking, and they're gonna go see Levin's brother, and then Kitty pops out and is like, "Oh, do you want to come in?" And he's like, "Oh, just kidding, like, go to your brother, that's fine, like, I'll stay here, I'll see you afterwards." And so they go to see his brother, and he is not doing great at all. And he didn't know quite what to expect, but what appeared was not what he expected. It was worse than what he expected. And so he's talking with him, and his brother is just struggling, and Levin is not mad, but doesn't really know what to say, but knows that he doesn't want silence. So he is talking and is just like, "Why didn't you tell me that it was this bad? Like, you had opportunities to tell me. Why didn't you tell me at my wedding? Like, I could have come and seen you earlier." Like, all of these other things. Mostly because, the shock of seeing him so dramatically different from the last time, which was a shock from seeing him from previous, and then also because, like, he's just nervous and doesn't know how to handle just the silence and having silence between them. And so he's talking, and Levin's brother is just like, "Oh, Maria, like, please clean up, blah, blah, blah. It's a kind of a mess in here." So Maria cleans up, and Levin is talking about his wife, and his wife is here, and so he's going to go get Kitty and bring Kitty over. And Levin, on the way over to his room, decides that he wants to convince Kitty not to go. And so he goes in there fully thinking, "I'm going to tell Kitty basically not to go." And so he goes in there and he's like, "Oh, it's just awful. It's terrible. Everything is miserable. He's doing horribly." And Kitty's like, "I'm going to go. I'm going to go there with you. Like, seeing you without seeing him is worse than me seeing him as well. We will both take on all of the stress." And so she goes and sees him. And it's like almost like a little reunion, because they did meet when Kitty was overseas, when she was abroad. And there we are. Chapter 18. Levin could not look calmly at his brother. He could not himself be natural and calm in his presence. When he went into the sick man, his eyes and his attention were unconsciously dimmed, and he did not see and did not distinguish the details of his brother's position. He smelt the awful odor, saw the dirt, disorder and miserable condition, and heard the groans, and felt that nothing could be done to help. It never entered his head to analyze the details of the sick man's situation, to consider how that body was lying under the quilt, how those emaciated legs and thighs and spine were lying huddled up, and whether they could not be made more comfortable, whether anything could not be done to make things, if not better, at least less bad. It made his blood run cold when he began to think of all these details. He was absolutely convinced that nothing could be done to prolong his brother's life or to relieve his sufferings. But a sense of his regarding all aid as out of the question was felt by the sick man and exasperated him. And this made it still more painful for Levin. To be in the sick room was agony to him, not to be there, still worse. And he was continually, on various pretexts, going out of the room and coming in again, because he was unable to remain alone. But Kitty thought and felt and acted quite differently. On seeing the sick man, she pitied him, and pity in her womanly heart did not arouse at all that feeling of horror and loathing that it aroused in her husband, but a desire to act, to find out all the details of his state and to remedy them. And since she had not the slightest doubt that it was her duty to help him, she had no doubt either that it was possible, and immediately set to work. The very details, the mere thought of which reduced her husband to terror, immediately engaged her attention. She sent for the doctor, sent for the chemists, set the maid who had come with her and Marya Nikolaevna to sweep and dust and scrub. She herself washed up everything, washed out something else, laid something under the quilt. Something was, by her directions, brought into the sick room. Something else was carried out. She herself went several times to her room, regardless of the men she met in the corridor, got out and brought in sheets, pillowcases, towels, and shirts. The waiter, who was busy with a party of engineers dining in the dining hall, came several times with an irate countenance in answer to her summons, and could not avoid carrying out her orders, as she gave them with such gracious insistence that there was no evading her. Levin did not approve of all this. He did not believe it would be of any good to the patient. Above all, he feared the patient would be angry at it. But the sick man, though he seemed and was indifferent about it, was not angry, but only abashed, and on the whole, as it were, interested in what she was doing with him. Coming back from the doctor, to whom Kitty had sent him, Levin, on opening the door, came upon the sick man in the instant when, by Kitty's directions, they were changing his linen. The long white ridge of his spine, with the huge, prominent shoulder blades and jutting ribs and vertebrae, was bare, and Marya Nikolaevna and the waiter were struggling with the sleeve of the nightshirt and could not get the long, limp arm into it. Kitty, hurriedly closing the door after Levin, was not looking that way, but the sick man groaned, and she moved rapidly towards him. "Make haste," she said. "Oh, don't you come," said the sick man angrily. "I'll do it myself." "What say?" queried Marya Nikolaevna. But Kitty heard and saw he was ashamed and uncomfortable at being naked before her. "I'm not looking. I'm not looking," she said, putting the arm in. "Marya Nikolaevna, you come to this side. You do it," she added. "Please, for me. There's a little bottle in my small bag," she said, turning to her husband. "You know, in the side pocket. Bring it, please, and meanwhile, they'll finish clearing up here." Returning with the bottle, Levin found the sick man settled comfortably, and everything about him completely changed. The heavy smell was replaced by the smell of aromatic vinegar, which Kitty was, with pouting lips and puffed-out rosy cheeks, was squirting throughout the little pipe. There was no dust visible anywhere. A rug lay by the bedside. On the table stood medicine bottles and decanters tidily arranged, and the linen needed was folded up there, and Kitty's broderie anglaise. On the other table, by the patient's bed, there were candles and drinks and powders. The sick man himself, washed and combed, lay in clean sheets on high raised pillows, in a clean nightshirt with a white collar about his astoundingly thin neck, and with a new expression of hope looked fixedly at Kitty. The doctor brought by Levin and found by him at the club was not the one who had been attending Nikolai Levin, as the patient was dissatisfied with him. The new doctor took up a stethoscope and sounded the patient, shook his head, prescribed medicine, and with extreme minuteness explained first how to take the medicine, and then what diet was to be kept to. He advised eggs, raw or hardly cooked, and seltzer water, with warm milk at a certain temperature. When the doctor had gone away, the sick man said something to his brother, of which Levin could distinguish only the last words. "Your Katya." By the expression with which he gazed at her, Levin saw that he was praising her. He called, indeed, to Katya, and he answered her. "I'm much better already," he said. "Why, with you, I should have got well long ago. How nice it is." He took her hand and drew it towards his lips. But as though afraid she would dislike it, he changed his mind, let it go, and only stroked it. Kitty took his hand in both hers and pressed it. "Now, turn me over on the left side. Go to bed," he said. No one could make out what he said but Kitty. She alone understood. She understood because she was all the while mentally keeping watch on what he needed. "On the other side," she said to her husband. "He always sleeps on that side. Turn him over. It's so disagreeable calling the servants. I'm not strong enough. Can you?" she said to Marya Nikolaevna. "I'm afraid not," answered Marya Nikolaevna. Terrible as it was to Levin to put his arms round that terrible body, to take hold of that under the quilt, of which he preferred to know nothing. Under his wife's influence he made his resolute face that she was so well. And putting his arms into the bed, took hold of the body, but in spite of his own strength he was struck by the strange heaviness of those powerless limbs. While he was turning him over, conscious of the huge, emaciated arm around his neck, Kitty swiftly and noiselessly turned the pillow, beat it up, and settled in it the sick man's head, smoothing back his hair, which was sticking again to his moist brow. The sick man kept his brother's hand in his own. Levin felt that he meant to do something with his hand and was pulling it somewhere. Levin yielded with a sinking heart. Yes. He drew it to his mouth and kissed it. Levin, shaking with sobs and unable to articulate a word, went into the room. End of chapter 18. All right, so this is kind of like a Levin. We knew Kitty should have gone the whole time. Why did you try to fight it earlier? So Kitty has, at the end of the previous chapter, Kitty was like, we need to do something here. This room will not do. And so this whole chapter, Kitty is bustling about. She's dusting. She's getting the stench of just body and sickly body at that out of the air. She's taking care of Levin's brother. She's, fluffing his pillow, making sure that he is getting, the food, the doctor that he needs, the diet that he's supposed to be on, making sure that he's taking the medications that he needs, and just really trying to make him as comfortable as possible. And Levin, which is the exact opposite of Levin's reaction. Not that he wanted his brother to be uncomfortable, but that, Levin kind of froze when he saw his brother, and Kitty knew what needed to be done. She sprang into action. She had this like mental checklist of all of the things that she had to go through. She saw all of these problems that was presented to her, and she just fixed them. She checked them off one by one, and she had something to do, which I love. I love that. And I feel like both Levin and Kitty's reactions to this situation are both so human and so complex and real feeling. And that's just great writing. Good job, Tolstoy. It's almost like he knows how to write. This might catch on. Chapter 19. Thou hast hid these things from the wise and prudent, and hast revealed them unto babes. So Levin thought about his wife as he talked to her that evening. Levin thought of the text, not because he considered himself wise and prudent. He did not so consider himself, but he could not help noticing that he had more intellect than his wife and Agafea Mikhailovna. And he could not help knowing that when he thought of death, he thought with all the force of his intellect. He knew, too, that the brains of many great men, whose thoughts he had read, had brooded over death, and yet knew not 100th part of what his wife and Agafea Mikhailovna knew about it. Different as those two women were, Agafea Mikhailovna and Katya, as his brother Nikolai had called her, and as Levin particularly liked to call her now, they were quite alike in this. Both knew without a shade of doubt what sort of thing life was and what was death, and though neither of them could have answered and would even not have understood the question that presented themselves to Levin, both had no doubt of the significance of this event, and were precisely alike in their way of looking at it, which they shared with millions of people. The proof that they knew for a certainty the nature of death lay in the fact that they knew without a second of hesitation how to deal with the dying, and were not frightened of them. Levin and other men like him, though they could not have said a great deal about death, obviously did not know this, since they were afraid of death, and were absolutely at a loss what to do when people were dying. If Levin had been alone now with his brother Nikolai, he would have looked at him with terror, and with still greater terror waited, and would not have known what else to do. More than that, he did not know what to say, how to look, how to move. To talk of outside things seemed to him shocking, impossible. To talk of death and depressing subjects, also impossible. To be silent, also impossible. If I look at him, he will think I am studying him. I am afraid. If I don't look at him, he'll think I'm thinking of other things. If I walk on tiptoe, he will be vexed. To tread firmly, I'm ashamed. Kitty evidently did not think of herself, and had no time to think about herself. She was thinking about him because she knew something, and all went well. She told him about herself even, and about her wedding, and smiled and sympathized with him, and petted him, and talked of cases of recovery, and all went well. So then she must know. The proof that her behavior in Agafea Mikhailovna's was not instinctive, animal, irrational, was that part from the physical treatment, the relief of suffering. Both Agafea Mikhailovna and Kitty required for the dying man something else more important than the physical treatment, and something which had nothing in common with physical conditions. Agafea Mikhailovna, speaking of the man just dead, had said, "Well, thank God he took the sacrament and received absolution. God grant each one of us such a death." Katya, in just the same way, besides all her care about linen, bedsores, drink, found time the very first day to persuade the sick man of the necessity of taking the sacrament and receiving absolution. On getting back from the sick room to their own 2 rooms for the night, Levin sat with hanging head, not knowing what to do. Not to speak of supper, of preparing for bed, of considering what they were going to do. He could not even talk to his wife. He was ashamed to. Kitty, on the contrary, was more active than usual. She was even livelier than usual. She ordered supper to be brought, herself unpacked their things, and herself helped to make the beds, and did not even forget to sprinkle them with Persian powder. She showed that alertness, that swiftness of reflection which comes out in men before a battle, in conflict, in the dangerous and decisive moments of life. Those moments when a man shows once and for all his value, and that all his past has not been wasted, but has been a preparation for these moments. Everything went rapidly in her hands, and before it was 12 o'clock, all their things were arranged cleanly and tidily in her rooms, in such a way that the hotel rooms seemed like home. The beds were made, brushes, combs, looking glasses were put out, table napkins were spread. Levin felt that it was unpardonable to eat, to sleep, to talk even now, and it seemed to him that every movement he made was unseemly. She arranged the brushes, but she did it all so that there was nothing shocking in it. They could neither of them eat, however, and for a long while they could not sleep and did not go to bed. "I'm very glad I persuaded him to receive extreme unction tomorrow," she said, sitting in her dressing jacket before her folding looking-glass, combing her soft, fragrant hair with a fine comb. "I have never seen it, but I know. Mamma has told me. There are prayers said for recovery." "Do you suppose he can possibly recover?" said Levin, watching a slender tress at the back of her round little head that was continually hidden when she passed the comb through the front. "I asked the doctor. He said he couldn't live more than 3 days. But can they be sure? I'm very glad, anyway, that I persuaded him," she said, looking askance at her husband through her hair. "Anything is possible," she added with that peculiar, rather sly expression that was always in her face when she spoke of religion. Since their conversation about religion when they were engaged, neither of them had ever started a discussion of the subject, but she performed all the ceremonies of going to church, saying her prayers, and so on, always with the unvarying conviction that this ought to be so. In spite of his assertion to the contrary, she was firmly persuaded that he was as much a Christian as she, and indeed a far better one. And all that he said about it was simply one of his absurd masculine freaks, just as he would say about her broderie anglaise, that good people patch holes, but that she cut them on purpose, and so on. "Yes, you see this woman, Marya Nikolaevna, did not know how to manage all this," said Levin. "And I must own I'm very, very glad you came. You are such purity that—" He took her hand and did not kiss it. To kiss her hand in such closeness to death seemed to him improper. He merely squeezed it with a penitent air, looking at her brightening eyes. "It would have been miserable for you to be alone," she said, and lifting her hands, which hid her cheeks flushing with pleasure, twisted her coil of hair on the nape of her neck and pinned it there. "No," she went on. "She did not know how. Luckily, I learned a lot at Sodden." "Surely there are not people there so ill?" "Worse." "What's so awful to me is that I can't see him as he was when he was young. You would not believe how charming he was as a youth, but I did not understand him then." "I can quite believe it. How I feel that we must have been friends," she said. And, distressed at what she had said, she looked round at her husband, and tears came into her eyes. "Yes, might have been," he said mournfully. He's just one of those people of whom they say they're not for this world. But we have many days before us. We must go to bed, said Kitty, glancing at her tiny watch. End of chapter 19. Okay, chapter 19 brings us Levin and Kitty again. And something that I totally forgot that Tolstoy reminds us of it is when Kitty was abroad, she did take care of sick people. So of course she already had that like tenderness and knowing what to do and knowing how to make the sick feel more comfortable and more like humans, and like talking to them about like her life and their wedding that they had and all of these things, and just trying to acknowledge the elephant in the room of the dying man, but also like there's still hope, and just because he's dying doesn't mean it has to be uncomfortable. Like she can do everything in her power to make it as ease, make it full of ease, as much ease as possible. I was trying to make that sound better. I just failed and keep making it sound worse. Oh boy. Okay, let's see. Chapter 20. The next day, the sick man received the sacrament and extreme unction. During the ceremony, Nikolai Levin prayed fervently. His great eyes, fastened on the holy image that was set out on a card table covered with a colored napkin, expressed such passionate prayer and hope that it was awful to Levin to see it. Levin knew that this passionate prayer and hope would only make him feel more bitterly parting from the life he so loved. Levin knew his brother and the workings of his intellect. He knew that his belief came not from life being easier for him without faith, but had grown up because step by step the contemporary scientific interpretation of natural phenomena crushed out the possibility of faith. And so he knew that his present return was not a legitimate one, brought about by way of the same working of his intellect, but simply a temporary, interested return to faith in a desperate hope of recovery. Levin knew, too, that Kitty had strengthened his hope by accounts of the marvelous recoveries she had heard of. Levin knew all this, and it was agonizingly painful to him to behold the supplicating, hopeful eyes and the emaciated wrist lifted with difficulty, making the sign of the cross on the tense brow, and the prominent shoulders and hollow, grasping chest, which one could not feel consistent with the life the sick man was praying for. During the sacrament, Levin did what he, an unbeliever, had done 1,000 times. He said, addressing God, "If thou dost exist, make this man recover." Of course, the same thing has been repeated many times. "And thou wilt save him and me." After extreme unction, the sick man became suddenly much better. He did not cough once in the course of an hour, smiled, kissed Kitty's hands, thanking her with tears, and said he was comfortable, free from pain, and that he felt strong and had an appetite. He even raised himself when his soup was brought, and asked for a cutlet as well. Hopelessly ill as he was, obvious as it was at the first glance that he could not recover, Levin and Kitty were, for that hour, both in the same state of excitement, happy, though fearful of being mistaken. "Is he better?" "Yes, much. It's wonderful." "There's nothing wonderful in it." "Anyway, he's better," they said in a whisper, smiling to one another. This self-deception was not of long duration. The sick man fell into a quiet sleep, but he was waked up half an hour later by his cough. And all at once, every hope vanished in those about him and in himself. The reality of his suffering crushed all hopes in Levin and Kitty, and in the sick man himself, leaving no doubt, no memory even of past hopes. Without referring to what he had believed in half an hour before, as though ashamed even to recall it, he asked for iodine to inhale in a bottle covered with perforated paper. Levin gave him the bottle, and the same look of passionate hope with which he had taken the sacrament was now fastened on his brother, demanding from him the confirmation of the doctor's words that inhaling iodine worked wonders. "Is Katya not here?" he gasped, looking round while Levin reluctantly assented to the doctor's words. "No, so I can say it. It was for her sake I went through that farce. She's so sweet, but you and I can't deceive ourselves. This is what I believe in," he said, and squeezing the bottle with his bony hand, he began breathing over it. At 8 o'clock in the evening, Levin and his wife were drinking tea in their room when Marya Nikolaevna ran into them breathlessly. She was pale, and her lips were quivering. "He is dying?" she whispered. "I'm afraid we'll die this minute." Both of them ran to him. He was sitting raised up with one elbow on the bed, his long back bent and his head hanging low. "How do you feel?" Levin asked in a whisper after a silence. "I feel I'm setting off," Nikolai said with difficulty, but with extreme distinctness, screwing the words out of himself. He did not raise his head, but simply turned his eyes upward, without their reaching his brother's face. "Katya, go away," he added. Levin jumped up, and with a peremptory whisper, made her go out. "I'm setting off," he said again. "Why do you think so?" said Levin, so as to say something. "Because I'm setting off," he repeated, as though he had a liking for the phrase. "It's the end." Marya Nikolaevna went up to him. "You had better lie down. You'd be easier," she said. "I shall lie down soon enough," he pronounced slowly. "When I'm dead," he said sarcastically, wrathfully. "Well, you can lay me down if you like." Levin laid his brother on his back, sat down beside him, and gazed at his face, holding his breath. The dying man lay with closed eyes, but the muscles twitched from time to time on his forehead, as with one thinking deeply and intensely. Levin involuntarily thought with him of what it was that was happening to him now. But in spite of all his mental efforts to go along with him, he saw by the expression of that calm, stern face that for the dying man all was growing clearer and clearer, that was still as dark as ever for Levin. Yes. So, the dying man articulated slowly at intervals. "Wait a little." He was silent. "Right," he pronounced all at once reassuringly, as though all were solved for him. "Oh, Lord," he murmured, and sighed deeply. Marya Nikolaevna felt his feet. "They're getting cold," she whispered. For a long while, a very long while, it seemed to Levin, the sick man lay motionless. But he was still alive, and from time to time he sighed. Levin by now was exhausted from mental strain. He felt that, with no mental effort, could he understand what it was that was right. He could not even think of the problem of death itself. But with no will of his own, thoughts kept coming to him of what he had to do next, closing the dead man's eyes, dressing him, ordering the coffin. And, strange to say, he felt utterly cold, and was not conscious of sorrow nor loss, less still of pity for his brother. If he had any feeling for his brother at that moment, it was envy for the knowledge the dying man had now that he could not have. A long time more he sat over him so, continually expecting the end. But the end did not come. The door opened, and Kitty appeared. Levin got up to her, got up to stop her. But at the moment he was getting up, he caught the sound of the dying man stirring. "Don't go away," said Nikolai, and held out his hand. Levin gave him his, and angrily waved to his wife to go away. With the dying man's hand in his hand, he sat for half an hour, another hour. He did not think of death at all now. He wondered what Kitty was doing, who lived in the next room, whether the doctor lived in a house of his own. He longed for food and for sleep. He cautiously drew away his hand and felt the feet. The feet were cold, but the sick man was still breathing. Levin tried again to move away on tiptoe, but the sick man stirred again and said, "Don't go." The dawn came. The sick man's condition was unchanged. Levin stealthily withdrew his hand, and without looking at the dying man, went off to his own room and went to sleep. When he woke up, instead of news of his brother's death which he expected, he learned that the sick man had returned to his earlier condition. He had begun sitting up again, coughing, had begun eating again, talking again, and again had ceased to talk of death, again had begun to express hope of his recovery, and had become more irritable and more gloomy than ever. No one, neither his brother nor Kitty, could soothe him. He was angry with everyone, and said nasty things to everyone, reproached everyone for his sufferings, and insisted that they should get him a celebrated doctor from Moscow. To all inquiries made him as to how he felt, he made the same answer with an expression of vindictive reproachfulness. "I'm suffering horribly, intolerably." The sick man was suffering more and more, especially from bed sores, which it was impossible now to remedy, and grew more and more angry with everyone about him, blaming them for everything, and especially for not having brought him a doctor from Moscow. Kitty tried in every possible way to relieve him, to soothe him, but it was all in vain. And Levin saw that she herself was exhausted, both physically and morally, though she would not admit it. The sense of death, which had been evoked in all by his taking leave of life on the night when he had sent for his brother, was broken up. Everyone knew that he must invariably die soon, that he was half dead already. Everyone wished for nothing but that he should die as soon as possible, and everyone, concealing this, gave him medicines, tried to find remedies and doctors, and deceived him and themselves and each other. All this was falsehood, disgusting, irreverent deceit. And owing to the bent of his character, and because he loved the dying man more than anyone else did, Levin was most painfully conscious of this deceit. Levin, who had long been possessed by the idea of reconciling his brothers, at least in face of death, had written to his brother, Sergei Ivanovich, and having received an answer from him, he read this letter to the sick man. Sergei Ivanovich wrote that he could not come himself, and in touching terms he begged his brother's forgiveness. The sick man said nothing. "What am I to write to him?" said Levin. "I hope you are not angry with him." "No, not in the least," Nikolai answered, vexed at the question. "Tell him to send me a doctor. 3 more days of agony followed. The sick man was still in the same condition. The sense of longing for his death was felt by everyone now at the mere sight of him, by the waiters and the hotel keepers and all the people staying in the hotel, and the doctor, and Marya Nikolaevna, and Levin, and Kitty. The sick man alone did not express this feeling, but on the contrary was furious at their not getting him doctors, and went on taking medicine and talking of life. Only at rare moments, when the opium gave him an instant's relief from the never-ceasing pain, he would sometimes, half asleep, utter what was ever more intense in his heart than in all the others. "Oh, if it were only the end," or "When will it be over?" His sufferings, steadily growing more and more intense, did their work and prepared him for death. There was no position in which he was not in pain. There was not a minute in which he was unconscious of it. Not a limb, not a part of his body that did not ache and cause him agony. Even the memories, the impressions, the thoughts of his body awakened in him now the same aversion as the body itself. The sight of other people, their remarks, his own reminiscences. Everything was, for him, a source of agony. Those about him felt this, and instinctively did not allow themselves to move freely, to talk, to express their wishes before him. All his life was merged in the one feeling of suffering and desire to be rid of it. There was evidently coming over him that revulsion that would make him look upon death as the goal of his desires, as happiness. Hitherto, each individual desire aroused by suffering or privation, such as hunger, fatigue, thirst, had been satisfied by some bodily function giving pleasure. But now, no physical craving or suffering received relief, and the effort to relieve them only caused fresh suffering. And so all desires were merged in one. The desire to be rid of all his suffering and their source, the body. But he had no words to express this desire of deliverance, and so he did not speak of it, and from habit asked for the satisfaction of desires which could not be satisfied. "Turn me over on the other side," he would say, and immediately after he would ask to be turned back again as before. "Give me some broth. Take away the broth. Talk of something. Why are you silent?" And directly they began to talk, he would close his eyes and would show weariness, indifference, and loathing. On the 10th day from their arrival at the town, Kitty was unwell. She suffered from headache and sickness, and she could not get up all the morning. The doctor opined that the indisposition arose from fatigue and excitement, and prescribed rest. After dinner, however, Kitty got up and went as usual with her work to the sick man. He looked at her sternly when she came in and smiled contemptuously when she said she had been unwell. That day he was continually blowing his nose and groaning piteously. "How do you feel?" she asked him. "Worse," he articulated with difficulty. "In pain." "In pain? Where?" "Everywhere." "It will be over today. You will see," said Marya Nikolaevna. Though it was said in a whisper, the sick man, whose hearing Levin had noticed was very keen, must have heard. Levin said "hush" to her and looked round at the sick man. Nikolai had heard, but these words produced no effect on him. His eyes had still the same intense, reproachful look. "Why do you think so?" Levin asked her, when she had followed him into the corridor. "He has begun picking at himself," said Marya Nikolaevna. How do you mean? Like this, she said, tugging at the folds of her wooden skirt. Levin noticed, indeed, that all that day the patient pulled at himself, as it were trying to snatch something away. Marya Nikolaevna's prediction came true. Towards night, the sick man was not able to lift his hands and could only gaze before him with the same intensity, concentrated expression in his eyes. Even when his brother or Kitty bent over him so that he could see them, he looked just the same. Kitty sent for the priest to read the prayer for the dying. While the priest was reading it, the dying man did not show any sign of life. His eyes were closed. Levin, Kitty, and Marya Nikolaevna stood at the bedside. The priest had not quite finished reading the prayer when the dying man stretched, sighed, and opened his eyes. The priest, on finishing the prayer, put the cross to the cold forehead, then slowly returned it to the stand, and after standing for 2 minutes more in silence, he touched the huge, bloodless hand that was turning cold. "He is gone," said the priest, and would have moved away, but suddenly there was a faint stir in the mustache of the dead man that seemed glued together, and quite distinctly in the hush they heard from the bottom of the chest these sharply defined sounds, "Not quite. Soon." And a minute later the face brightened. A smile came out under the mustaches, and the women who had gathered round began carefully laying out the corpse. The sight of his brother and the nearness of death revived in Levin that sense of horror in face of the insoluble enigma, together with the nearness and inevitability of death that had come upon him that autumn evening when his brother had come to him. This feeling was now even stronger than before. Even less than before did he feel capable of apprehending the meaning of death, and its inevitability rose up before him more terrible than ever. But now, thanks to his wife's presence, that feeling did not reduce him to despair. In spite of death, he felt the need of life and love. He felt that love saved him from despair, and that this love, under the menace of despair, had become still stronger and purer. The one mystery of death, still unsolved, had scarcely passed before his eyes, when another mystery had arisen, an insoluble urging him to love and to life. The doctor confirmed his suppositions in regard to Kitty. Her indisposition was a symptom that she was with child. End of chapter 20. Wow. Okay, what a wild chapter. Okay, chapter 20. Levin's brother is still just on the verge of death, and he's been on the verge of death for several days now. Longer than several days, but Kitty and Levin have been there for several days, and it is just wild to them. Like, they have prepared sour. They've prepared for him to die several times. There's still hope every once in a while, and then he'll get worse, and then it's like, okay, well, there's no hope. And then he'll smile and he'll start talking, and then it's like, okay, we're hoping again. And then he'll get worse, and he'll just like hate everybody and just be mean to everybody and just be like so back and forth, like flip me on one side, okay, just flip me on the other side, like trying to just hold on, but also not hold on. Like, it seems like both he's ready to go, but at the same time doesn't want to go and isn't ready to go. So there's that. It is interesting. We've read several books that deal very closely with death, and I always find it interesting how authors specifically deal with that, because it is such like a touchy subject, and people deal with it and process it so differently. So I'm always curious about that. And then how authors write their characters to react to it, which is also interesting. And But that's not all. The chapter ends with the confirmation that Kitty is with child now. And there you have it, folks. Okay, let us see here. Because I know that I said that we were finishing part 5 today, but that might have been a lie. Okay, that feels good. Everything feels good and ready. Okay, excellent. I'm really enjoying this. I'm still enjoying this. I'm still liking Tolstoy's writing style. I still am liking the bubbling, like, simmeringness of all of the things that are going to go wrong and are currently going wrong. And I am just ready for all of these explosions in all of these characters' lives. I'm ready for all of the chaos, the more chaos that's going to happen. I am interested to see what's going to happen when Kitty, like, is a mother and has, like, her motherly roles, and how Levin is going to react to that, because he is just a silly little friend. It seems like he doesn't know anything. He doesn't understand anything that is outside of Levin's world. And even then, he doesn't really understand. But that's it. Thank you all for being here. It was a pleasure. I really enjoyed today. As always, whether you lurk, whether you chat, I 1000% appreciate you, and I 1000% appreciate your support. If I don't see you next time, I hope to see you very soon. Bye.